I really think statistics is pretty cool. Combining measurements from individual data points, which are hopeless to interpret on their own. Using medians, means, modes, and other methods like them, we can take what could not be understood and make it not only simple, but actionable. Suppose we want to calculate inflation in an economy. It's obviously hopeless to attempt to chart the growth of every single pricing object in an economy. But if we take a basket of specific goods and average out their prices, we can chart how they grow over time. We can understand inflation in a way which we can act upon and use to respond to problems, or even predict them before they happen. Statistics give us the ability to predict the future. However, what is seemingly obvious to you and I is a shockingly recent practice. To take data and combine it and average it has only been around since the mid-1700s. And even in the 1860s, long after its adoption, when economist William Stanley Jevons, an English economist credited with the introduction of mathematics into economics, suggested averaging out the prices of products to measure inflation, he was laughed at by critics, who called it absurd to measure the prices of things like pig iron and pepper together. But today, we do exactly that. It's called the cost price index, and it's likely how you measure inflation unknowingly. Sometimes nuance is lost when we combine data, but that is not important. Seeing the bigger picture is often the goal of statistics. However, sometimes, in combining, we are a little too hasty and lose a little too much. The 12th century England had a problem. They needed coins, and lots of them. The king and the barons who controlled his land, and more quietly actually owned it, would need currency and coins to pay off their debts and to maintain their infrastructure. However, there was a big problem. Coins are hard to produce, and this job was of vital importance. If coins were too heavy, they would be molten down as they held more value as gold than as actual currency. And if coins were too light, people would not trust the barons nor the king's currency. Hence they would lose their power and strength as a government. It is fascinating how much these great men's power depended on their control of the gold, and how much that remains true today. So the king stipulated that trials would be held to make sure the mint was producing coins up to the correct quality and weight. And one of the first quality assurance trials in history, which started either in the late 1200s or early 1300s. These trials are so important they continue to be held today. The mint's master is held on trial by a judge to ensure coinage is actually to the standards stipulated by the king. The master would be required to pay a fine equivalent to the value of coins misappropriated since the previous trials if coins are of poor quality, and in earlier trials, the master's hand would be threatened to be chopped off if coins are not properly produced. This is how seriously the king and his barons took the production of these coins. Despite the severity and seriousness of these trials, they were the conclusion of a fairly straightforward process. When first started, from each batch of coins produced, a certain selection would be set aside for later testing in a box called the pikes. Documents of the first ever trials are really unclear, however, if this selection was truly random and how the coins were even chosen. Considering there is no arithmetic method to generate random numbers, it's likely they were chosen based on some method demonstrating an understanding of the importance of a random sample. However, it's quite unclear. Understanding the importance of these trials to the king and the barons, how would we attempt to construct a method to prove each coin's value? Taking into account weighing one coin at a time would be incredibly slow, and being as fair as possible to all three parties. In any case, it was actually conducted much like this. Assume we have a target weight for each coin, and let's call that T. And assume we can only allow a certain error called E, above or below each target weight. So, for each coin, for example, T minus E would be the lightest acceptable weight, and T plus E would be the heaviest acceptable weight. The main concern, however, was mostly light coins. So, quite simply, the coins in the box were all on average below T minus E, the master loses his hand. Easy. The coins would be weighed in batches. If a single coin was out of spec, it wasn't really that huge a deal, but if large chunks of coins were consistently out of spec, there would be a real threat posed to both the system and the king. It seems rather intuitive if we measure coins in batches of 100 at a time, the target should be 100T. But what should our error be? Seemingly at the time, they thought the error should also be 100E. Seems kind of intuitive. Hence, if the coins weighed a little less than 100T minus 100E, the mint should fail. Did you notice the error I made? This fails our previous parameters. It's far too generous to the mint. If the sneaky master of the mint wanted to gain some gold, he could simply aim at minus 0.5 E or minus 0.8 E. Any number between T minus E and T itself would be in range of the accepted range, and would almost never ever fail. But why is this quite so generous to the mint? Why do I say that? Well, if we take the formula 100T minus 100E, and we factor out the 100, we get the formula 100 times T minus E. This quite clearly indicates to us that for the mint to fail, every single one of the 100 coins would be the entire weight out of the target. Needless to say, the master never lost any hands. Assuming the error on every single coin was random and completely independent from the error on every other coin, i.e. an error in one has nothing to do with the others, the error should only be 10E instead of 100. This is called the root n rule. The variation of sums does not add linearly with the number of terms, it adds with the square root of the terms. However, this wasn't noticed. For decades, the trials went on just as this, 100T minus 100E. The acceptable range, however, was almost 20 standard deviations from where it should have been, as opposed to the modern error, which is set at only 2 standard deviations from the target weight. One mathematician, however, that ran the mint from 1696 to 1727 did notice the faulty assumption. He was much better than the average mathematician, and he would die incredibly wealthy. Of course, this is due to his incredible investments and his expert understanding of the root n rule, and no suspicion whatsoever from the man who made all the money. And this man's name? Well, it was Isaac Newton. This mysterious error I refer to as the root n rule is actually called the standard error of a sample, basically referring to how far our subset of values differ from the target values we already believe to be accurate. So in our previous example, the standard error would be how far our coins vary from their target weight T. Standard error is calculated using the formula standard error is equal to standard deviation over root n, where n is the number of values we choose. As a reminder, standard deviation measures how much individual values, on average, vary from the mean of a sample. A low standard deviation means most values fall near the mean, and vice versa. You can visualize this quite easily on a distribution graph, as how stretched out the distribution is. So for example, this is a low standard deviation graph, and this is a high standard deviation graph. It's calculated using this formula. It's not that complicated. It basically just adds up the difference between every single value and the mean, squares it to make sure it's always positive, and it then divides by the number of terms to average it out, then take the square root. For example, if I have a sample of 100 coins and their standard deviation is 20 grams, that would mean that most of the values lie within plus minus 20 grams of the mean. I would also receive a standard error of 2.5 grams if I, for example, select 64 coins from this 100 coin set. But the reason I find this so interesting, and what drove me to make this video, is because it diverts your expectations so subtly. Such a simple problem. How much error should I expect in my sample is so unintuitive. It demonstrates why you must always be careful when presented with statistics, as most data can be skewed and face extremely simple errors. And while by no means I expect every single person to understand what standard error is, I hope that you can at least be more cautious the next time someone presents you with some massive conclusion. So next time you're sitting in statistics class, remember this really has a point to it. You ask yourself, what on earth am I going to use standard error for? If not for you understanding it, millions of greedy bankers around the world might be stealing a very small portion of your hard-earned pocket change. And as Newton may or may not have taught us, statistics is a fundamental part of our world. Whether you like it or not, it will sneak into every industry you choose to work in. But without it, people might still be losing hands to this day.